Well, welcome everybody to the Creo seminar. My name is Mark Behrens. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a professor in sociology. I'm also the director of the Center for Research on Educational Opportunities. As we all know, we've had a lot of speakers on education this year, thanks in large part to Father Jenkins and the President's Forum on Education, and many different departments around campus that have invited speakers to Notre Dame. Among all of the great speakers that we've had, I've got to say I'm most excited about our speaker today, and that's John Merrow. John, in my view, and many others, is the premier, influential, thorough, and thoughtful education reporter in the United States. His reporting, his stories, his interviews have shed important light on the state of education in the United States. In fact, I'm really excited to have him here, and I know all of my former students who've got to come today, I don't know here, but because often in my classes I use some of the clips that John has done about reporting the United States, because the images and stories he tells are much more profound than any word that could ever come out of my mouth. So I'm very grateful that he's here today. To provide a brief background, John did his undergrad at Dartmouth. He went on to earn a master's degree at Indiana University, so welcome back to Indiana. Went on to earn his doctorate at Harvard. He started in the 70s with National Public Radio and had a weekly program there called Options in Education. And that was the start of a very long career that's gone over 35 years and has earned him many awards and many honors. He's also, besides his reporting, he's a fellow at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching at Stanford. I suggest that you take a look at his blog called Taking Note. He's written many books, the latest of which is called The Influence of Teachers, Reflections on Teaching and Leadership. John, it's truly an honor to have you. I ask all of you to give him a warm welcome to CREO, the Institute of Education Initiatives, in the University of Notre Dame.
Thank you thank you very much. Thank you. It is such a treat for me to be here. It's my first visit to Notre Dame. I've already added at least one phrase to my lexicon, English as a new language, which is wonderfully insightful that you guys are using instead of English as a second language. I spent 20 minutes with Father Ted. I saw Touchdown Jesus. You know, I've been to a class, a breakfast, a dinner. It's a treat to get up in front of you all. And every time I get up in front of a crowd, I think back to the first speech I ever gave. I was in graduate school at Harvard, and I had two little kids, and the PTA at a small town west of Cambridge offered me $50 to come speak. And as I say, I was on scholarship and I had two little kids. $50 in 1972 was a lot of money. And I was all excited. I prepared a slideshow. Some of you may remember what a slideshow is, but I was, the role of the lunchroom in the third grade curriculum or something like, a real barn burner of a speech. But I was pretty excited, and I was supposed to speak at 7 o'clock. But I got out there at about 6 because I'd never given a speech before, and I wanted to practice and be ready. And of course, there was no one there. 6:30, there's no one there. 7:45, 6:45, there's no one there. I'm beginning to get a little bit worried. Finally, at about 2 minutes of 7, one person walks in. Well, I thought, okay, you have to give your all. One person, you want to give your all. It was a little bit awkward, because I had to ask him to operate the slide projector. Now, in a burst of chutzpah, the summer before this, I had taken a speech course at a community college. Just thinking, well, somebody's going to ask me to speak, and learning how to give a public presentation. And one of the things that had stuck with me was make eye contact. Well, my professor would have been proud, you know. This is a true story. And so I probably went through my slides fast. I mean, just one person to talk to. And I finished, and I got the slide projector, wrapped it up, and started to leave. And he said, hey, wait a minute, fair's fair. I'm the second speaker. So, so it is very nice to see you all here. Now, the other thing I learned, I mean, you are here, but many of you, I don't say unfortunately, the data suggests strongly that most of you will not listen, even though you're here. And you probably saw that, well, it's old research now where they wired up people's, to plot brain activity during speeches. And what they found is that, don't hold me to the exact numbers, but these are pretty close, that 9% of the people in a crowd actually listen. 9%. And 21% half listen, go in and out. They're thinking part of the time paying attention. The other part they're thinking about, I wonder, did I remember to turn off the gas? Or would the dryer make it through the winter? Or does the car need a tune-up? Or I wonder how my kid is doing, that kind of thing. So it's half and half. And the other, the 70% of the audience spends time during public presentations engaging in erotic fantasy. Now, this is Notre Dame. I don't know if that means it'll be higher or lower, and I don't want to go there. But I, given the world we live in, I think that's fine. Now, and I encourage it. There are a couple of points that are important, and I will go like this when I have something I want you to pay attention to. Other than that, you're on your own. But I saw that, and I have Mark said that the video is more effective than the spoken word, and I'm probably proving that's true. But I know I was billed as scared sleepless, public education in the age of No Child Left Behind, and I'll talk a little bit about that. That's kind of the working title of a book I'm hoping I can write one of these days. But what I would like to tackle 9 or 10 or 11 myths or generally accepted postulates about education in America and riff a little bit on some of them with your permission. Now, it's true, I did write about a couple of these in this book, which I hope you will go on Amazon and buy, but not only that, I hope you will buy it and I hope you will enjoy it, but if you enjoy it, please do not loan your copy to anybody. Make them buy their own. Okay? That's the author's plea, right? And actually, I donated the royalties to my nonprofit, so you'll be doing a favor to nonprofit coverage of public education. Should you do that? So, myth number 1: the achievement gap is education's biggest challenge. It is, of course, the thing everyone talks about, the achievement gap. We have to close the achievement gap. There's one way to pinpoint the absurdity of that by just pointing out the achievement gap between Asian American kids and white kids. A serious gap. Got to do something about it. We got to have more test prep for the white kids. Got to get rid of recess for the white kids, so on and so forth. But as I see it, we have 4 fundamental gaps. By the way, my favorite piece of video in all my years was an interview with a teacher union leader, and he's talking about why you cannot hold teachers accountable. And he says, on camera, And I'm asking him, suppose you're a math teacher and the kids don't learn, and I'm a math teacher, my kids learn, should we? And he says, no. Imagine you have 2 math classes. It's like, anyway, sorry. So anyway, there are 4 achievement gaps. there are 4 gaps. There's an opportunity gap. I mean, life is unfair, but you want to really see life unfair, go to some public schools here and public schools there. And go to public schools in New Hampshire. Did a piece about a married couple teaching. In the morning they drove 2 cars. They went out of the driveway, one turned this way, one turned that way. One went to a high school that had a climbing wall, da-da-da. Another went to a junior high school where the textbooks, the science book, man had not landed on the moon. So we have an opportunity gap. We have an expectations gap. We really don't ask very much of our kids, wherever they are. I mean, there's a documentary called Race to Nowhere, which is, has anyone seen that? Yeah. In my view, it's not a great film, but it's a strong message. But it's only talking about 9 or 10% of our kids. 80, 90% of our children, we don't ask very much of them at all. We don't expect very much of certain kinds of kids who may not look quite like me, or who may not be well dressed. So there's an opportunity gap, there's an expectations gap. I believe there is a leadership gap. Education is a reactive profession anyway, but we need leaders who will take chances. We need to create a system where people can try stuff and be encouraged to try stuff and recognize that falling short, it's like sports. You don't make the jump shot the first time. You can practice, practice, practice. We need leaders who will encourage that, who have that mindset and do it themselves. And then finally, when you take those 3, you get a 4th one. You get an outcomes gap, what's called the achievement gap. But what we do in this country is we only focus on the outcome. So we say, okay, well, what we have to do is change the outcome. How do we do that? Let's drill the kids to pass the tests. And that's what happens. I mean, this is, T.S. Eliot, in that bleak poem, The Wasteland, said April is the cruelest month. Now, he means it's the cruelest month because it's a month of regeneration. Things turn green and new, and that's hope. And hope is meaningful. Hope is meaningless. I mean, that's his bleak view of the world. But for kids, April is quite literally the cruelest month. If it's not test prep, it's tests. How insane is it? Go to preschool. Now, poor kids, regardless of color, are likely to arrive in preschool or kindergarten having heard millions fewer words with a far smaller vocabulary than their advantaged peers. Some people say it's 20 million words they've heard. Well, we did the math on that, and the parents, those voluble parents, would actually have to be talking 14 hours a day nonstop to get to 20 million. But let's say it's 5 million. So how do they try to close that vocabulary gap in preschool? They drill. Now, how do these advantaged kids learn all the words? They learn it in conversation. Well, that's a leadership issue and a failure to understand the conditions that create. So it's a myth. But, and I want to come back to this later, whoever gets to name the problem is in charge. Is it the Queen in Alice in Wonderland who words mean what I say they mean? I'm shaky on my Alice in Wonderland, but I think that's correct. And the same thing is true. If you get to define the problem, then you get to choose the cure. But if it's a faulty diagnosis, you are not going to cure. You may actually make it worse. I mean, do a medical analogy there. If they say you have this when you have that, the treatment for this may actually make that worse. So diagnosis is a myth. Okay, so that's myth number 1, and it is a myth in my view. Number 2, charter schools are part of the solution, a big part of the solution. I think that's only half true, or it could be true. Charter school, what does the term charter school tell you? Almost nothing. What does the word restaurant tell you? Their equivalent. Charter school over the door just says that it's a different kind of governance. Doesn't say there's anything decent going on in there at all. So, in some places, well, you know the numbers, I'm sure, that only 17% of charter schools do better than traditional public schools. And I think it's in a way a silly study, because you'd have to look at the conditions under which the charter was given and the gauges by which the charter will be judged. The state of Arizona gave out charters like Halloween candy. You want a charter? Here, help yourself. You want a charter? Here, help yourself. And by the way, we'll leave the money on the table and help yourself. And there are people in jail because they set it up. They set it up to fail, essentially. Lots of people were allowed to authorize charters. Indian tribes could authorize charters. Indian tribe in this corner of the state authorized a charter down in that corner of the state. In New Orleans, where I've been filming since Katrina, they set a very high bar. They turned down, I think, 7 out of 8 applicants, or 8 out of 9. So they set a really high bar. Sorry, you can't have a charter. Sorry. So yeah, okay, you, because they had serious criteria. The consequence is, there's nothing that is not double-edged in some way. Consequence is they kept a lot of lousy schools open because they didn't have, so some kids got shortchanged. But when you get energetic, serious people, give them authority, hold them accountable, great things can happen. Now, if the accountability is how you did on the bubble test, you're almost by definition shortchanging the innovation and the energy of these young people have come in. I was talking somewhere today, I don't remember where, about a story, and it's not apocryphal. It's a little bit overblown, but a guy in New Orleans wanted to start a charter school that would be arts themed. They build a curriculum around the arts. And if you do art and music is very mathematical, so you're going to teach math. You'd be teaching writing if if the 4th graders were going to write an opera, do the libretto, build the set, cast it. They're going to learn about a story arc and character and working together and all that stuff. In the end, he didn't do it because, the end of the year test comes in mid-April, and that's all that really counted. So you have the charter notion, but then you have a way to stifle innovation. So partial myth, charter schools part of the solution. They could be. And I have to say that Mark mentioned that I've been around for a long time. I actually ran the meeting back in 1988 where charters were born as an idea. It was at the headwaters of the Mississippi River. Ironic, because that's the river that destroyed the schools in New Orleans some years later, and now they're rebuilding as a charter system. Life is full of ironies. But the intention there was that every school district would have a charter school, and they'd use it as a little lab. Let's try this. If it works, tell everybody else. Never happened. The school boards fought it. The unions fought it. Even though Al Shanker is really the father of charter schools, and he was at that meeting, he later on changed his mind. But charter schools could. I'm not so sure about profit-making charter schools, but okay, myth number 3, teachers are overpaid and underworked. That is a myth, and that's a myth we ought to address. Teachers work hard, and if you have ever been a teacher and entertained the notion of going back into teaching, I strongly suggest you take 2 years off to get in shape. It is really hard work what teachers do, day in, day out, with very little break. I mean, very little chance to collaborate, very little, you can't go to the bathroom when you need to. I mean, you got to, make a phone call when you need to. Are they overpaid? 40 years ago, the average teacher salary was the equivalent of the average college graduate salary. Today, it's 85% of the average salary. In 40 years, the average teacher salary has increased $3,800. That's total, that's not per year. So that's a raise of less than 100, this is adjusted for inflation, less than $100 a year. That is, if you want to do the math, it's 0.75% salary increase year after year after year. And during this time, of course, the pressure on teachers has mounted as we're now going through this teacher accountability stuff. So the teaching profession is changing. I mean, so that's a myth about teachers. That teaching profession is changing dramatically as we speak. In 1987, the mode, everybody remembers the mode, the most common. The modal years of experience was 15. We had more teachers with 15 years experience than any other kind of teacher. Today it's roughly bimodal. There's still a lot of 15s, but they're 1s and 2s. The teaching force is getting greener. It's getting whiter, which is unfortunate because the student body is not. And it's also getting more female. It's becoming re-feminized. I would argue that none of those things is good, that we would do better if we had a more equally distributed by gender, and certainly by race and by experience. But the turnover in the teaching force in Washington, D.C., where we're doing a documentary as well, it's about 40% of teachers leave in the first and second year. Actually, it's closer to 50%. It's generally thought that 50% of new teachers leave in 5 years, and 30% leave in 3 years. In Washington, it's 35% in 2 years. And Washington, as you may know, is in quadrants, and there is one place west of the park which is relatively high income. There's not much turnover there at all. But go over here, and it's going to be as high as 50%. The very kids who need the stability don't get it. Okay, a fourth. If you want to interrupt or argue or do, okay? I mean, yeah, that's myth number 4, we spend too much on education. Is that a myth? Now, Governor Daniels is not here to argue about that. And I don't know the numbers for the state of Indiana. But in 1980, we spent about $500 billion on public education. Today, it's approaching $700 billion. That's a big, big increase. However, in 1980, that spending was 9% of GDP. Of gross domestic product, 9%. Today, we devote 5% of GDP to education. The country, the economy has grown dramatically. Spending on education has grown, but, and as I just said, we don't spend it on teachers. We aren't spending it on teachers. And it's a good story for graduate students here to go follow the money. So I would argue it's a myth. I mean, I think we don't spend money well, but I think it's a false proposition to say we're spending too much. I think we could probably spend more, but I would start by figuring out ways to spend it better before you spend more. But number 5, myth or not, is we spend too much time and money on testing. True or false? How many of you think that's true? We spend too much time and money on testing. Give me hands. We spend too much, Okay, very few. You think we should spend more time and money on testing? More time and money on testing? We got it right about right, or you just aren't paying attention? You're doing those all right. Okay, all right. I got you now. Let me ask again. How many? No, never mind. I would argue that we spend too much time and not enough money. American children are the most tested children in the world. And we're not just talking Finland. We're talking a lot of other countries. We just spend an awful lot of time testing our children. Oftentimes we're testing our kids because we're trying to keep track of the teachers. Time was, when I was a kid, we trusted teachers. In part because there weren't other opportunities for women. So the schools were filled with smart women. And happily that's changed. I mean, women are now, we have more women college graduates and all that sort of stuff, which is all to the good. It has hurt the teaching profession. So we've gone from trust. And if you don't believe about what I'm saying about trust, get a report card from somebody. I'm 70. And look at the report card, and you'll see there's a big place for the kindergarten teacher to write comments like this. And if you have young kids, look for that space. If they're in public school, you probably won't find it. Now, maybe in Catholic schools you do find it. But so now we've gone to verify. We used to be trust. Now it's verify. Ronald Reagan, in his wisdom, said trust but verify. And he was talking about the Soviet Union, but it makes sense in education. Let's trust the people, but let's also verify. And we need to get back to some kind of balance. So most tested kids in the world, but what do we test them with? All right, for every $100 we spend in education, this is another one of those moments, how much of that $100 is spent on the tests? I'll take answers from the floor. 50 out of every $100, this every $100 we spend on education, how many dollars or cents or whatever you want to do we spend on the tests? 87 dollars out of every $100. You're only leaving $13 to transport the kids, to pay salaries, to heat the school. Okay, you're wrong. But that's good. Thank you for answering. Somebody else? $2. I have $2. I have $87. Come on. Are you if someone gets it, someone gets my book. Okay. If you get it, if you nail it, you got to nail it. You get this book. 9 cents. I can't hear you.
9 cents.
5 cents?
9.
Is that what he said?
9 cents.
9 cents. Okay. Well, come on. Doesn't anybody want my book? Oh, you can. It came all the way out here from New York. You won't even play my game. $4.50. You want to change your $87? Are you going to stick with your 87? $21. Okay. Mark? $1.50. We don't have a winner yet. We have one person who is relatively close, and it's not you.
$2.
You got $2, right? You had $1.50?
$5.
$5? All right, I'm closing the bids. I get to keep the book. The answer is 15 cents. 15 cents out of every dollar. Now, that is, since we spend roughly 12 grand, 11 to 12 grand a year on educating our kids, we then spend 15 cents measuring whether it worked. Now, I drive a used Toyota 4Runner, 2002. It cost me $12,000, roughly what we spend educating a kid. Now, I assess that Toyota every year to the tune of $600. The tune-up, it's all that sort of thing. So 15 cents for the kid, $600 for the car. I want to tell you that Hearts, anybody know what Hearts makes? Kitty litter, bird feed, bird seed. They spend far more testing their products than we spend testing our kids. So, do we spend too much time and money? We spend too much time and nowhere near enough money. I mean, those of you who are statisticians know that you could test the health of a system with a sample. But we don't do that. We test everybody, and somebody's making some money. By the way, 15 cents out of every $100 is a lot of money if you're Pearson or McGraw-Hill. But is that sensible? I don't know. Would you take your child to a doctor who charged 15 cents for the physical? Maybe not. But in any case. So,
I have a question.
yes.
I hate to just ask out this and to encourage questions. What's wrong with the fact that the teachers just give tests in the classroom? Back in my day when teachers were trusted, there wasn't standardized testing around, which was fine. Why are we throwing that out?
Well, it's a great question because the data indicates that the best judge of a student performance are teacher-made tests. And I don't think they're thrown out on a wholesale. I mean, I think they're still given, and the teacher then computes that as part of the student's grade. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that bubble test, or most often a bubble test. I think it's a failure of leadership. I mean, it's a genuine failure to educate people that, look, why not? I mean, I suspect that Catholic schools do it right, and they are judging the sort of health of the institution, and not just and not focusing. And that, yes, sir.
But you say a failure of leadership, but people, politicians who pass the rules are aware. And if I'm from Tennessee and I say we will teach evolution, I have just lost my job. I just lost my job.
Yeah.
So you cannot have leadership and stay in office.
Well,
Kansas, where all these great dinosaur museums, they're against evolution too. I mean, there's all these kind of places where the state government will say, we're not going to teach these subjects.
well, yeah, okay. Now, this is a conversation we actually had at dinner last night about where are the great college presidents of yesteryear? Where's the Father Ted, et cetera, speaking out on these important value issues of our time? They're not there. That's what I mean by failure of leadership. Sure, you get kind of Yahoo politicians will give in to this small group of people, and it does, I think, take the courage to stand up and say, wait a minute, where are they? I don't know. And we had a conversation at dinner last night. Could anyone name 5 college presidents? I mean, I could. When Father Ted was president and Bart Giamatti at Yale and so on and so forth, that they were people we turned to. And I mean, we have income inequality of the worst order now. And a college president, university president wouldn't have to say the prescription is this, but at least to frame the issue and say, what are the consequences of doing this? Let's look at the consequences and I believe in that most people are decent, and you have to argue that it isn't, you have to make them see that it is in fact in their interest to educate all children, for example, to give all children a decent opportunity. You can say it's in your interest because, hey, you're going on Social Security soon, buddy, and you want people working. That's one reason. It's in their interest from a moral point. This is the United States of America. Look what we say we believe in. Well, here's a way, and you could say it's just personal safety. If you don't educate them, they grow up and mug you. You can make any one of those arguments, or all three, to get people. But we need leaders who would say, but I also think you need schools that are effective. And if you just do test scores as a measure, I mean, I was riffing on this earlier, that I think we ought to evaluate schools. And I would like to design the questionnaire, because I would ask questions like, how many hours of phys ed do your kids have per week? Just asking the question, implicit in there is 0 is probably not a good answer. 1 is, okay, but 4 is a better answer than 1, right? How many hours of art and music do your kids have, you know? Again, we don't even ask that question. So you got to get that stuff on the radar screen. And I don't think you can do it from Washington. I think No Child Left Behind has pretty much proved that Washington can't run public education. And Race to the Top is, you know, sort of son of No Child Left Behind. But there are a couple of interesting things happening with standardized tests. About 400 school boards have signed a petition to the state of Texas saying we don't want high-stakes testing. And they represent 1.8 million kids. That's a start. I was talking to Richard Rothstein this morning, who's a really knowledgeable guy about this, and he's been involved in that. And he said this is going to pick up speed. Superintendents in 2 big districts in Florida have just petitioned. This high-stakes testing is killing what we're doing. It is killing the spirit of kids and teachers. 1,500 parents in Colorado last week kept their kids home. Oh, it's a drop in the bucket, but it's 1,500 kids. Superintendent of a community school district in Queens signed the petition, in New York City, signed the petition, let's get rid of this high-stakes testing. The irony is that this is the district where Joel Klein went to high school. I mean, and Joel, of course, is one of the, even though he's no longer chancellor, has been one of the leaders of this push for testing. I want to show you some video and give you a break. So I'm presenting a myth or a postulate that college is prolonged adolescence. And at the end of the day, for many people, many young people, a waste of time and energy and resources. We spent a whole year on 4 campuses. U of A, Western Kentucky, Amherst College, and the Community College of Denver. And basically said to the elite college, we insist on access to your admissions process. We want to be able to videotape how you pick and choose. And we went to Brown, Dartmouth, Harvard, Yale, and Amherst. And I had a kid at Brown, so that didn't make sense, couldn't do that. And I went to Dartmouth to do that. So Amherst said yes, and Harvard said yes in a uniquely Harvard way. And no one had ever been inside Harvard. I actually have been inside admissions process at Williams and Middlebury. So they knew who I was. But Harvard said, yes, you may. And I said, great. Said, here's how it's going to work. We meet in this big room, and we argue back and forth. And you can set your camera up outside in the hall, and we'll come out every couple of hours and tell you what just happened. Right, thanks. That's great television. But at the U of A, we said what we wanted was access to athletics. And I think we only approached Oklahoma and football coach Bob Stoops, who said yes, and Arizona and basketball coach Lute Olson, who said yes. And we chose Arizona. The weather is better. I don't know. No, we chose Arizona. I think it was basketball season. And he was wonderfully gracious. And if you get to see this film, it's quite revealing about athletics. But I hope you didn't recognize Notre Dame in that. And I suspect from what I've heard and learned in my short time here, there's a lot of close attention, and there's expectations of work, and do it again if it's not good enough. But the program is called Declining by Degrees. Clever title. Here, Mark, have a copy. You were closest. It's a couple of years old now. I think it's 2006 or 7. But we do not, again, as in high school, I think for so many young people, college's prolonged adolescence, and it's worse now because it's a debt machine. So, and I gather most students here don't graduate with debt, but this is an elite institution. More than half our graduates leave heavily in debt, or in debt, significantly in debt, so it influences their career choices. And a huge number of young people go to community college and leave not only in debt, but without any credits whatsoever, because they have this remediation machine that is set up. It's $1 billion industry. And you go, the young high school graduate goes and takes the placement test, and maybe doesn't understand that it's important and was out partying the night before, and gets the results and has a year of math. And there you go. And he's on a Pell Grant, and you use your year of math. You use your Pell Grant to do this year of math. Maybe get discouraged because it's high school all over again. It makes no sense whatsoever, except for the convenience of adults. I mean, the remedial class, if you get the placement test and this young man needs some help in multiplying fractions, okay, well, we know that. You see the test. You need help in multiplying fractions. Here's a book about it. There's some video, the Khan Academy. Come back next week and take the test. Or come in and get some help with it. And do tutorial. I mean, you could do it so easily if we really cared about the quality of life opportunities that we would create for young people. It's easier to do nothing. It's easy to have a department of remediation. Once you have a department of remediation, what does that department need? The answer is remedial students. One of my early documentaries on radio was about juvenile justice. And I spent 6 months, NPR was great, you could do what you wanted basically. I spent about 6 months in juvenile correctional facilities in South Carolina, Minnesota, and Kentucky, and somewhere else. And one of the things I learned was that no matter what the juvenile crime rate in Minnesota, the institution remained full. Remained full. Now think about that. The crime rate goes way down. What do? They redefine what it takes to get locked up. There's a category called PINS. Anybody know what that means? Persons in need of supervision. It's the 14-year-old girl who runs away twice. So she's called, and then there's some, have to report in. Crime rate goes down, we'll lock up the PINS kids, because you've got to keep the place full. I did my blog a month or two ago. I wrote that I was quitting because I was going to go into remediation, because I realized that was where the money was. And it was my attempt at satire, although I got some lovely notes from people thanking me for my brilliant career, not as a writer apparently, but what prompted it was the prisons, whatever it's called, the Prison Association of America, the for-profit prison groups. They have approached, I think, 46 states with an offer to run the prisons in that state, save the state money, with one proviso. The state had to guarantee what? That it would keep the prisons full. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's beyond satire. But it is, anyway, so I would argue that American higher education is coming in for a wake-up call. Not Notre Dame, not Harvard, but places that don't tend to their main purpose, which is career and life. We talk in this country now absurdly about preparing students for college and career, as if in fact, we even present it as if college means more than career. College is a way station. I heard a guy this morning say, we're in Catholic education, we're preparing kids for college, career, and heaven. I thought, oh, that's cool. It's not how I would phrase it, but it's a wonderful construct. But you don't just say, well, preparing kids for college is supposed to be where you get a chance to dig around, take some chances, have your work tested, And I always say to young friends or children of friends who are going off to college, figure out who the most exciting professors are and take her class, his class. Doesn't matter what the subject is. Just go take chances. You know, you have anchors. You don't have anchors, you have roots. You know who you are. You had your Catholic education or your family or whatever it is. You've got those roots, but you don't have any anchors. Take some chances. Go for it. You got 4 years, but go for it. Don't do it. If you get a chance to see this drinking stuff is unreal. This young man, whose parents must have just died a million deaths, decided he would show us how he cheats his way through college and drinks. And I mean, some of the footage we couldn't use. It was so amazing. But it's, you know, again, it's a leadership issue to me. I mean, but we really need more Father Ted. So, okay, I don't want to. How am I doing on my myths? I'm on number 7. In case you're keeping track, but myth or reality? Schools are borderline obsolete. I think very, very close to the border. And I would present it this way. With the exception of a few of you in this room, you are old enough to have gone to school when there were 3 justifications for public school. I mean, I was sent to school, I sent my kids to school for the three reasons. One is that's where we kept the knowledge. It was in the textbooks. It was made in the teacher's head. I mean, the library had some too. There wasn't this internet floating around. So you had to go to school. We sent our kids to school to be socialized. Boy to get along with girl, Catholic, Protestant, with just some socialization. There's an app for that, you know. I mean, think about it. Our kids are now socializing. It's like pen pals on steroids. So you're a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, Mark? 15-year-old? 17-year-old. Okay, well, I went a 14-year-old for this exam. I need a 4. Okay, you're a 14-year-old is socializing with 14-year-olds all around the world. But that 14-year-old that your 14-year-old is socializing with, you know, might be a 40-year-old congressman. I didn't make that up. But, the technology is a game changer. So the third reason that I was sent to school, you were sent to school, was for custodial care. Your parents were working. That's still true. We still need custodial care. But if you don't change the first 2, schools are obsolete. Not just obsolete, they're dangerous. So what we have now are answer factories. Spit back the answer. You heard that kid and said, you know, I just did the reading and I got 90 on the test. What we need are schools that help kids formulate questions. We all are living in this sea of information. You can pull out your smartphone and look something up. But just because it's there doesn't make it true. Even if it's there 7 times doesn't make it true. So you need schools that help kids formulate questions, because they have to separate the wheat from the chaff. And as responsible adults, we want them to choose the wheat. We want values to be taught. And we run away from that in public education, which is absurd. One of the attractions of Catholic education, a lot of private education, is the embracing of values. Public education is afraid of that, and that in itself is a value. Take technology. If you don't use technology if you don't harness the energy and strength and power of kids in positive ways, it will be used negatively. You know, the idle hands doing the devil's work. Well, idle hands with a smartphone really do the devil's work. Let me just give some examples of what I believe should be done. I think every middle school should have an air quality indicator. $30. And then 8 o'clock in the morning, noon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, some class goes out and does the AQI measurement. And then you plot the data and you share it with every other middle school in Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, France. You start looking for anomalies, you start, trying to understand. Now, that's just one thing. How about water quality? Now, that's a little more expensive. That's like $200. But, the state of Texas has 4,000 miles of fast-running water, not the Rio Grande, but, why not every science class go to the water? Measure the clarity, detritus, the speed, et cetera, and plot the data, share the data, look for anomalies, try to understand, because then you're creating knowledge. And that's it, and that just because we're putting our kids within these walls, the technology doesn't respect the walls, nor should the pedagogy. Why not have the kid in Paris, Texas, or the classroom in Paris, Texas, connecting with Paris, France, Springfield, Illinois, Springfield, Massachusetts. That's just, I was in a school in New Haven where the jazz group was practicing with the school in Rhode Island on Skype. And all you have to do is be within the speed of sound. They can't be more than 400 miles apart. Otherwise you get a time lag. And of course the kids were connecting when they were downtime, they could talk. So you don't have to have a full orchestra or jazz band. You can practice and then finally come together. I did a piece for the NewsHour. Some of you may have seen about music program where kids, Placido Domingo was, at the end, conducted them. These are poor kids in 2 schools. They'd never seen each other. They practiced, and then they finally got together to practice together and then got to perform at a black tie event. Now, if you had Skype, you could do that with 4 or 5 different groups. And these kids, this is using the technology to harness the energy of kids. And if we don't do that, it may benefit Catholic education. I believe it's going to lead to an increase in homeschooling. And we already lose 6,000 kids a day dropping out, which is over 1 million kids a year. I segued into number 8 about technology revolutionizing education. It could, but it ain't gonna right now because the adults in charge use technology to keep track. Where you monitor your attendance and your test scores and all that other stuff. Or they use it for drill, they use it for teaching machines. But the possibilities are endless. And every other aspect of our life has changed. Whether it's a dry cleaner, or everything has changed. Schools continue to kind of sit there. There are no real rewards for taking chances. Now, somebody asked me about this boycott, about the high-stakes testing boycott. Will that change? No, it won't. But what if a superintendent had the courage to go to her school board and say, okay, I understand the test means a lot. And I understand that we're going to do test prep. And I'm going to authorize 2 weeks of test prep on this condition. The previous 2 weeks are project-based learning, where the teachers can work together and design with the kids the projects, and some may want to build a canoe and some may want to write a symphony or whatever, but that it's all projects. We'll have enough time to get ready for it. Kids will have some choices of projects, and here's my deal, school board. You monitor student attendance during that 2 weeks versus test prep weeks. You monitor teacher attendance you monitor discipline, and let's just have a natural experiment to see what happens. And I say to the superintendent, if you'll do it, I'll come report on it. Because I believe if you could unleash that decency, most of the men and women who went into teaching did it because they want to make a difference. You gave them a chance to make a difference, but you'd have to structure it. You have to give some rewards for doing it. I don't know if it would happen, but if we don't if we don't not imagine the possible, just enable the possible. We know what can be done. We know what other countries do. So anyway, if technology revolutionize education, I think it's at this point wishful thinking. But if we don't grab that, and there are a lot of good people trying to grab it, if we don't, I think we're going to see public education be even less meaningful now than it is. By the way, this year's graduating high school class is the first all No Child Left Behind class. They've had 12 years of No Child Left Behind. And some of you sociologists should be constructing experiments. What are these young people going to be like, having grown up in a test, produce or else, test prep kind of school? I mean, they don't know anything different. That is so sad. And it's not changing because the Obama race to the top is really not a whole lot different. Okay, number 9, wrapping up here. Parents are the problem. And you hear teachers say that. And that is a total myth. Parents send their best kids to school. That's how it works. And to think otherwise is absurd. Schools have a kind of arrogance about parents. They'll set up a parent involvement committee. But they essentially have said for years, leave your kids at the door, leave the money at the door, and we're the educators. Well, that's silly. Anyone who's a parent knows that you're the primary educator of your children. So I would argue that what schools could do in first grade, as part of the curriculum, the first grade teacher say, okay, kids, go home tonight, and for show and tell tomorrow, ask your mom or your dad or your guardian about the first movie they remember seeing, and come in and tell us. So the next day, and then so every week have something that pulls the parent in. Now, first grade, you're really not doing too much writing, although some kids are. But by second grade, you can say, okay, kids, go home and ask your mom, your dad, your grandpa, your guardian about their favorite meal and write a paragraph about it. Okay, so you're interviewing your parent. And the parent's going to want to read what you wrote when you wrote about turkey meatloaf and and the parent's going to want to read what the teacher says about what the kid wrote. If you just did that every week, just one assignment every week, and just go all the way up, just 6th grade is far enough, you will have parents as part of the fabric of the school. And then you give teachers business cards so that there's a level, you guys have business cards, I have a business card. Give them that level of dignity so that they don't have, you go into parent-teacher, I can't remember the number of times you go in and say, come in, your kid's 7th grade teacher, 9th grade teacher. Hi, I'm John Merrow. Hi, yes, I'm Mrs. Maloney. You don't have a first name? No, they don't have a first name because they don't have the trappings of that. If they had a business card, say, yeah, I'm Kathy Maloney. Nice to see you, John. Boom. But so you need to treat teachers with a certain respect. But above all, that curriculum has to pull parents in. And the way to do it is to make them part of the storytelling. Kids are going to write. They don't have to write about polar bears. Why not write about the parents' first vacation they remember? Or there's thousands and thousands. So anyway, parents are not the problem. And finally, cheating. Cheating is widespread. That is unfortunately not a myth. That appears to be true. I guess 200 of the biggest school districts have cheating scandals. We're doing a Frontline about Washington, D.C. And by the way, it's not cheating by kids. It's cheating by grown-ups. And Atlanta is the poster child where they cracked the case because they brought in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation with subpoena power. And people are going to go to jail, not for cheating, they're going to go to jail for lying under oath. That's the only place I know where they've had that serious an investigation. But it's in this documentary for Frontline, it's fascinating. It'll be on this summer. there's so many wonderful ways to cheat. I had no idea. The tests arrive at school 5 days before they're given, and they're kept at school 5 or 6 days after they're given. That is what you Catholics call an occasion of sin, right? I mean, that's right. There it is. Maybe I shouldn't say what you. Not being Catholic, but that's my understanding of that. This anyway. There's plenty of sinning. We have stories of principals looking at the tests, getting the vocabulary words, and saying, I think these words. You might want to have your kids go over these words. There's a report we got today of an official saying to the teachers, this year's test of the 20 standards is only going to focus on these 8. Well, teach stories of teachers going around the room and you sure you want to put B? Or giving candy when there was a right answer. Oh, you got B, good for you. Well, everybody sees the candy and they hear B. Nudging, but that's just by teachers. But post-test is where it was picked up, on the erasures, where classrooms and schools with very high rate of erasures, 90+% of the time changed from wrong to right. Now, odds are it should be 50-50. It's like flipping a coin. But so there's, and they're doing it because the test means nothing to the kid, nothing. It's a high-stakes test for teachers, principals, and schools. Schools under No Child Left Behind. Teachers and principals under new rules, which are, we're going to get you if you're not good enough. And so there's a sociological, Campbell's Law, and sociologist Donald Campbell postulating that the more pressure you put on a single measure, the greater the probability that that measure will be corrupted, which is what we see happening. So I don't know how we change that, but if we don't change it soon, we are in big trouble. And finally, I want to come back to that, circle back to that question of education's problem. What's education's problem? I said whoever gets to define it is in charge. And is it low test scores? Is it high dropout rate? The battle now is, and I do write about this in my book, is whether it's bad teachers and the unions that are protecting them, or is it the job itself? Is it a bad job? And so there are two camps. Now you've had a number of people from the bad teacher, bad union camp here. Michelle Rhee, Chris Christie, probably Jeb Bush. But some powerful foundations, the Broad Foundation has been pushing that. Teach for America, that we need to replace those bad teachers. On the other side is Diane Ravitch with a megaphone, and not much else. I mean, they're outnumbered. And the bad teacher argument, analysis is carrying the day, and teachers are really under attack. It's hard to know why, or how you'd argue to your child that yes, you should go into teaching, and which is a real loss because young people have this desire to be helpful, to make this country better. And I saw it today in the ACE program, but I see it in other places. But we need to do more that encourages them, rewards them for doing that. But so that my own view is, well, the other side is it's a job. Teaching is not very well paid. You get harassed. You don't get to work with other people, and so on and so forth. And if we can figure out ways to change the job, change the working conditions, we'll find out that a lot of those so-called bad people are actually pretty darn good people to start with. But it's a battle that is ongoing. And as I said earlier, is irrelevant to the needs of children. who are growing up in this world of information, that they need help formulating questions, they need help harnessing the technology. But if we're going to do this thing, we're ignoring the needs of our kids. And, I wish after 37 years of reporting, I could be optimistic. And it seems like we're always at a crossroads, and there are wonderful opportunities, but absent some strong leadership and a national conversation about what we want, I think we're just running in place, and you can't run in place. You're going backward if you're running in place, because other countries are moving forward. So there's a lot at stake. And I frankly, everything I've heard here about what you do at this university and the ACE program and what Mark's program, trying to call attention, and not just call attention, but do something. That's heartening. So I'm going to go back feeling better. I probably made you all feel depressed, but I'm going to go back feeling a lot better. So I thank you very much for all that, and thank you for listening.
We have a couple minutes for some questions.
If there are questions, that's fine. Or yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering what you think about tenure, both as a way to let professors speak out against, practices and still do their jobs, but also as a way to promote sort of resting on the laurels.
I think tenure in higher education makes sense. I think you could probably have a renewable tenure in public education. Even Randy Weingarten, who's the militant union leader, she doesn't even say tenure anymore. She just says, as long as you have due process, there's some fair system for judging whether people are doing a good job and removing people, you don't have to say tenure. I mean, in California, you get tenure after 2 years, which really means that the administrators have to make the decision the first year. That's insane. To me, that's insane. I think Randy's trying to defuse it by saying we don't need to use that word, but it's such a lightning rod. I think you need it in higher ed, but I also think you need, you can't just have tenured track and adjunct faculty, because then you end up with just so many part-time faculty. So you have to find a third way, which I would think would be 5-year appointments for teachers, men and women who just want to come in and really teach. And take chances and do great stuff and don't care about tenure. And that way you'd have a strong, there are a lot of men and women who would do that, I think. But anyway. Anything else? Yes, sir.
So you talked about, certainly you talked about No Child Left Behind and leadership and the role of Washington. And there's been a lot of negative consequences of No Child Left Behind. It's probably the most federal intervention that we've had in education.
Sure.
Ever. So what's the right role? You've interviewed every U.S. Secretary of Education.
That's true, I have, yeah.
So from your perspective, what's the right role of Washington in the federal government? Or is there no role?
No, I think the role that emerged in the 60s where, to certain classes of children who were not being cared for, low-income kids, what were then called handicapped children in 75. The protecting those kids makes sense. No Child Left Behind essentially said, if you take any federal dollar, all your kids are under our thumb. That seems to me to be a huge mistake. I think the solution would probably emerge at a state level, where some states would be, with strong political leadership, would be willing to say, we want to have a vibrant education system and not tilt the playing field. I mean, Indiana seems to have tilted it one way. There's got to be a way to, for a small state to say, this is what we want, and then you'll be able to attract businesses from other places. I mean, companies coming in want good schools, and they want schools for all their workers, not just for their top executives. And I don't think Washington, No Child Left Behind really has been a disaster from everything. I mean, it had the soft bigotry of low expectations was the catchphrase that former President Bush used, and that's a meaningful expression. That's that low expectations thing. But I think the greatest thing that could come if we had a president who would engage the country in conversation about what we want for our kids and what does that mean. You know, even just to say, you know, I'd like to see if we can get public schools to be more like the school where I send my daughters. You know, where they do project-based learning, where they do close attention. What would it take? You know, but I don't see. I'm not an optimist about. I think when power gets there, power does stuff to people. We all know that. You know, George Bush was a states' rights guy when he came from Texas. Suddenly, he was a Washington rights guy. You know, Obama ran against No Child Left Behind, but we still have it. And he has offered waivers, his Secretary of Education has offered waivers. You don't have to do all this awful stuff. You get a waiver, you just have to do this stuff. But it's still do this stuff. So I'm not a fan, yeah.
I hear food and drink in the background. Yeah. So I want to invite all of you to the reception afterwards and ask further questions then. But thank you very much.
And thank you again. No, thank you again.